Hello, and welcome to a very impromptu NaNoWriMo prep lesson with my wonderful co-host, Christopher Russell, for today, mostly because I snagged him because he wasn't doing anything else, and he was...
Nope, I'm just happy to be here with Allegra.
Gallantly says
Yes.
he's happy to be with me. All right. Please excuse any banging you hear in the background. There are kobolds in my basement, and a friend is getting rid of them before she moves into my basement. They're a horrible infestation. Please don't get a case of kobolds. They never go away. But kobolds are not why we're here today, although they might show up and eat me. Who knows? What we are actually here to talk about is beat sheets. NaNoWriMo is approaching, and plotting out your NaNoWriMo can sometimes really help with productivity. Plotting in general can sometimes help with productivity, Chris.
As a recovering pantser, I understand this.
Yes.
I've moved into being a plantser. I'm a hybrid.
This is also kind of where I am because I make a plan, but the plan changes every single word I write. So my plan at the beginning and my plan at the end look nothing similar.
I mean, our half-plotted, half-pants novel is amazing, though. Technically, we haven't had any major betas look at it.
It's true, but we know it's amazing.
Yes.
Because it's the greatest thing ever written.
There are time gnomes, da-da-da-da.
Da-da-da-da. All right, so a lot of people have asked about my beat sheet template, and I have it up online for anyone to use. You have a link down in the description below. Feel free to make a copy for yourself. Play around with it. We are going to go through it today, line by line. Really dig deep into what every piece of the puzzle should be. Now, the order in which you put these things is not set in stone. A lot of things should and can move around, but this at least gives you a piece of what gives you an idea of what the pieces of the puzzle are, and then you can mess with them as with all information. I don't follow recipes; I just read them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and Chris is here to give his wonderful advice as a recovering pantser and person who has recently started plotting, both the good things and the bad things of plotting, like the fact that you never stop plotting. And
colors are fun.
Colors are fun. And with that lovely intro, hi, here are some colors. As I said, we do have the link in the description below, so feel free to actually jump into the document if you'd like to see what I'm doing piece by piece, and make a copy for yourself to play around with. It's useful to start from something instead of starting from nothing. In fact, that's one of the major ways to prompt creativity. The old adage, you ask someone to tell a story and they're just going to look at you blankly. You ask someone to tell a story about a princess captured by a dragon, and suddenly they have something to work with, and most people can tell a story. The lack of boundaries can often stifle creativity instead of create opportunity for creativity. This does exactly that. It gives you some boxes to fill in where you can start brainstorming from. So we're going to start not with the first thing, because we're going to go a little bit backwards and forwards here. We're going to start with a quick introduction of what mice stands for. I do have videos about this topic all over my channel. I've done several about the different elements of mice, and mice as a whole concept. But the mice quotient was developed by Orson Scott Card, one of the who shall not be named authors in my book. But this particular quotient is really, really useful when discussing conflict in stories. So mice stands for milieu, or setting. And that's conflict that arises from the setting. Someone's trapped on a desert island, and then they have to survive it. There is a snowstorm approaching. Whatever conflict comes from the setting is milieu conflict. Then we have intrigue. Intrigue conflict is like, a mystery. Someone got murdered. Who was the murderer? Or who's the secret heir to the kingdom? Anything that comes from intrigue will A betray B. That's the I in mice. C in mice's character. This is usually an internal journey. Will a character learn to be brave and noble instead of cowardly? Will Bilbo Baggins go on an adventure? Anything that is based on whether a character will do things or whether a character will grow is character conflict. Obviously, also conflict between characters falls into this umbrella. And E is event conflict. Who will win the tournament? The Hunger Games, only one will survive. Anything that has to do with an event. Who will the prince marry after the ball? This is a sort of conflict that comes from specific things happening in the plot and the ramifications thereof. That is the very short version of this. I think I have like a whole hour-long video on this somewhere else. Which shows I should probably do shorter videos.
No, it helps the YouTube algorithm, either really short or really long.
Oh, okay, so I'll just turn my live stream on and then walk away, and then for 10 hours it will just be...
Well, somebody has to watch. They can't just cut out, unless they like the color of your drapes.
Well, I have lovely drapes. You can watch the sunlight slowly fade. Anyways, so with that understanding of mice, the way I start plotting is I get a story concept. All right, Chris, what's a story concept that you've had rattling around in your brain?
A story concept rattling around my brain. Okay, you're going to like this one.
Okay.
Revolutionary War, but vampires.
Okay, I love it.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to take this simple Revolutionary War with vampires story concept. Really, there's not a plot there. It's just kind of a thing. Chris, what's the most important mice element in this Revolutionary War with vampires story?
Probably your setting, because you have the Revolutionary War. We've established that. We would move into even them being vampires, whether they're on the side of the Continentals or the side of the British. Both of those are setting where the vampires are going to be, what their society is structured like, how they have integrated themselves into society. Is King George III a vampire? Is George Washington?
So it almost sounds like Intrigue might be the second most important.
Because you're basing it around you're bringing in vampire mythology, and that often deals with intrigue. Anything that's dealing with fables, fairy tales, anything in that general idea. And then, of course, it again, you move into character, because who is a vampire, what they're dealing with in their life. Do they want to be cured? Are they in love with a human, a mortal? How are they invested in the conflict? Is this some sort of plot by the vampires to take over the world? That's more intrigue, but there's character elements that go along with that. What makes each of them tick?
And then event is going to kind of be the least probably important individual source of conflict, because it's really more about how the milieu, intrigue, and characters happen around the events.
And you would have like converging, so you could say that all of these events with the vampires play into maybe Valley Forge. Like, how does Washington get his army through Valley Forge? And maybe there were vampire spies that had infiltrated the camp.
So we have established on this wonderful vampire Revolutionary War story that the most important element is the milieu. The milieu, therefore, becomes the main plot. And we have to touch on the milieu in pretty much every single chapter. That plot, that conflict has to be the backbone of the story. It's the Revolutionary War. And there are vampires.
I'm going to have to pull up my notes on this, because this was one of those fever dreams where you wake up and you immediately record something down and it sounds like a brilliant idea, and then you wake up 4 more hours later and it clearly wasn't.
Really not. Yes, I get those all the time. In fact, I have a whole folder of future ideas, and most of them are that. Other than the giant document, which is just memes become stories. Anytime I see a meme that I just want to write desperately, I have a whole folder for them. There's too many. I'll never get to write all of them in my lifetime. It makes me super sad. Anyways, so once you've figured out what your main item is and put it into row 4, and so this is specifically milieu, the war, the revolutionary. with vampires. All right, an intrigue. Vampires.
Okay, this is actually more fleshed out than I thought it was.
Characters dealing with war and vampires. And the event, war happens, yo. That about sums it up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, these three, so we're going to have our intrigue, our character, and our event become side plots A, B, and C. So suddenly we have a main plot, a side, and 3 side plots. These side plots help flesh out that main plot, but they should always be in service to the main plot. They can't be completely out of left field, or they really don't belong in the story. That's why it's really important to focus on what that main plot is and to take your time at this stage of plotting to really determine, yes, in fact, it is the milieu, or maybe you realize actually the intrigue is going to be way more important and the milieu is just flavor, and that could completely change how you write the story. But let's assume that this is the correct way for this thought experiment. So now we have a few broad strokes. Because these are elements of conflict, we are also going to have to decide how they, what incites the conflict. And that's going to be the inciting incident. So in the very first chapter, we're going to move some of these around. So it doesn't actually have to happen in the first chapter, but it should happen within the first 2 to 3. There's the rare story that it happens later on. For example, the inciting incident in the Hunger Games is I volunteer as tribute, which happens well into the story and isn't at the beginning at all. But it's still very, very early in the story. So we're going to figure out what the inciting incident that launches the milieu conflict is all about. It could be the war has begun. That's a possibility. Specifically, since it has vampires, the war has begun because of vampires. Chris, how does the war begin because of vampires?
Okay. So this is going off of my little sort of outline here because I thought of something slightly more entertaining. So, the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party was not about tea. You see, British vampires were smuggling a secret sort of like blood compound into the colonies to give to their brethren. And then the colonists up and dump that all into the harbor. And this rightfully pisses off all the British vampires.
Perfect. The war begins. So we start with the Boston Tea Party. That is our inciting incident.
They thought that the harbor was turning red because it was a very ruddy type of tea. It was not. It was blood. It was congealed blood.
Yeah, as one has on a ship. You're real. Vampires are normal. Anyways, okay, so we have introduced the milieu. We know that there's a conflict here between the British vampires and the human colonists. Great. Perfect, beautiful milieu conflict. All right. So now we also, very importantly, within the first few chapters, need to introduce what the character wants. So this seems like a prologue sort of thing. Boston Tea Party. Probably the main characters we're going to follow aren't even going to be there. Right?
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. So the character's wants are probably going to be revealed in the first chapter, which again should focus on the milieu. Now, I don't know about you, but I would do a small time skip here.
Yes. Well, obviously, if you're going to be skipping into the war proper because the Boston Tea Party predates the war. Yes. I like how we're bouncing back between nonsensical and serious. That's kind of what writing fantasy is.
It's exactly what writing fantasy is. All right, so we're going to skip into the war, and we're going to introduce the main character,
Leopold,
and what they want. Leo, got it. Okay, what does the main character want?
Well, what is the main character's background?
That's a good question. this is where you want to do that background character work. We're not going to do that because I could give in fact, we already did a whole live stream on disaster characters. Go watch that. I'll probably also do a whole live stream on specifically building realistic and evocative characters that make you really feel. But for this, we're just going to make it up. So, Leo, is he a vampire or is he a human?
If we're focusing on conflict, let's make him a colonist that's a vampire, not of like a noble lineage or anything like that. And that because his family has been living in the colonies since, let's say, Jamestown, since its inception.
It's like going...
Yes, he's going along with the colonists. So maybe
like
he's a spy for Washington or something. That way he can play both sides and end up interacting
Double agent.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, Leo the double agent. And that's beautiful for milieu because we're really seeing that the conflict in Leo's life isn't because of any personal baggage. It's because he's torn between these two worlds. All right, that's our main plot. Leo the double agent in this Revolutionary War with vampires. Great.
Yep.
All right, so this chapter, the first milieu chapter, it introduces what Leo wants. And what does Leo want? Does he want to get out of the war? Does he want one side to win?
Again, that goes back to his backstory. So there's two ways you can go with this, I think. That one is he's trying to protect a very small group of people, that he doesn't care what happens with the actual war, but these people are going to be adversely affected if he is not a spy. That either...
Maybe like the vampire community that lives in the colonies?
Yes. And so the vampire community lives in the colonies that... Well, that would I would think that he'd want to side with Britain if they actually need these blood packets or whatever that we had dumped into the Boston the Boston Harbor.
Maybe in Britain they have a supply chain for blood, so you don't have to like go vampire. Whereas in the colonies, you have to go vampire around.
And so this can bring back to no taxation without representation, that they've been trying to compel the colonial vampires. And so this is fighting for their community's independence against the greater British vampire lineage or noble house.
Yes.
So there are essentially two wars going on at once.
One that the humans know and one that the vampires know.
Yes.
I love it. All right. So what he wants is to protect his community. That's why he's in the war. He might not be the best soldier, but he is willing to soldier on if it means protecting the people he cares about. All right. So the next chapter is all about the intrigue. The milieu needs to move on, which means the Revolutionary War needs to continue to happen. But we need to introduce the intrigue of Britain vampires versus New World vampires and humans. I think this requires another character.
Okay, so do we want to cross the lines or do we want to stay on the same side but give another perspective?
I think this should be a 3 to 4 character POV book with, we have at least 3, a human,
yes,
a New World vampire, and a British vampire.
Okay, 3. Yep, perfect. So the second one, are we writing a romance conflict into this at all?
It's a very good question. I'd say that for the sake of this beat sheet is not necessarily a romance beat sheet, so let's not put in a romance.
Okay, so
this
no romance.
Straight action. These people are going to be intrigue and fighting, and maybe soldiering on together, but no romance.
Okay, so Leo is a spy. Leo is going to give us the intrigue, and he's going to give us the undercurrent of what's going on both sides. Maybe he even ends up in a meeting room from both sides because somebody has to deliver him a piece of information. You can also have court intrigue and soirees, and he can go to plays. There's a lot you can do with that.
Yes.
So now we need somebody that's more grounded. Do we show the wider conflict and what's going on the surface?
I think we should put some higher up in the British vampire side.
Yes, so I was still thinking about the colonial side because we would have 2 if we're focusing in on the colonials as protagonists. Then your second one would be maybe like a low-ranking soldier.
Well, I'm thinking that the low-ranking soldier is where a lot of character development will be.
Okay, so you're moving that to 4. Yes. So excuse me. I'm just dealing with this is the pantser in me coming out. Now I'm trying to do everything at once.
So I think the intrigue comes from the British side.
Correct.
So higher up in the British vampire community.
Now, I mean, if we want to take this all the way to the end of the world, you could have it be someone like Cornwallis. That way, there's extra irony.
Introduces the intrigue. So this character, this chapter is all about that second mice element that establishes the first of the side plots. It should still contain the main plot, but it essentially is all about the intrigue. Then the next one is going to be characters dealing with the War of the Vampire. So human, colonial, foot soldier. Here we get the gritty reality of this war they're fighting. It sucks. It sucks to be a human because we don't even know that there are vampires. But because, again, we have to keep it being a milieu-oriented story, this could be the human first encountering vampirism.
Which, if we want to bring in the gritty and the gore of the Revolutionary War, what if there is an underground blood ring that going on in the field hospitals on either side, that they're siphoning it off and they're triaging people that wouldn't have died into the dead so that they can just drain everything that's left?
I love it. That beautiful. Okay, so this now is the last side plot. Now we introduce our event. What event is going to bring the milieu character, the intrigue character, and the character in? What's undercurrent of actual happenings in the plot are going to make this story go boom? Because we're really getting very close to the lock-in. Now, the lock-in is the no turning back point.
So let's do something big, one that everyone would have been involved in. We started with the Boston Tea Party, so let's stay in that area before we branch out. Battle of Bunker Hill.
Okay, so Battle of Bunker Hill.
Happens outside of Boston. It's only a little bit after the start of the Revolution. Everyone's going to have to stay on their trajectories after this point.
Are affected by it. And that means the lock-in is that in some way, shape, or form, this battle makes it so that every single one of these characters is now fully committed to their plot line. Now, it could be, I'm going to save my community. I'm going to stamp out this frickin' rebellion. And I just want to survive. Please don't eat me. Those seem to be our 3 sides of this. But all characters commit. There is no going back. Now, this is also very important because the lock-in has two main things. It establishes the main tension of the novel it's going to be, which is in this case is just how is the war going to end? Like, that's the plot, and we've now established that there are high stakes, that not all of the characters can win because they're on opposite sides. The nice amount of tension, and none of them is going to go back. They all are locked into a trajectory. Now, as the Act 2 begins, this transition, either just before the break or just after the break, is where the characters' needs are revealed. Now, the characters' wants and the characters' needs are different. A want is what you think you need, and a need is what you actually need. There are so many examples out there, but I think the best one is Mad Max Fury Road. They think they need to get to the green place. What they need is to right the wrongs that are happening where they are and take down the baddies and make a home for themselves. So this is basically setting up that third act twist, late second act, early third act twist, where the characters' wants shatter and the characters' needs arise to save the day. So, what is the need of the main milieu character.
Okay, so the actual need of the main character.
Yeah, he wants
So
to
what?
save his community. What does he
Mhm.
need? Maybe he needs to find a way for vampires to not actually be damaging to their neighbors.
Not
the way that the British
because
do it.
that'll solve the underlying plot, the underlying cause of the war.
Yes. So
because I don't know, I didn't. It's essentially a magic system that you're developing in that case.
But Leo needs to find a way for vampires not to do harm to humans but still survive. That saves his community, fulfilling his want. That also ends the dependence on Britain. Meaning the war is now easy. He's not being pulled both ways. But that's still very far off. So this is set up as a whole chapter. It often doesn't need to be a whole chapter. This is why I said that the beginning of Act 2 and the end of Act 1 are often get squiggly, because whether that need is established at the end of Act 1 during the lock-in or in the first chapter or two of Act 2 is really negotiable. What's important is that it's established close enough to that lock-in that it forms a cause and effect chain with that lock-in. That something about the end of Act 1 causes the character to go on a trajectory to realize that they have this other need. Now, some characters are super aware of their needs, and suddenly they realize they have a want, they have a need, and they're different, but they're still in line with each other. Sometimes characters are woefully ignorant of their needs until basically the end. There's a lot of, I needed to have revenge, but what I actually needed was found family that you don't realize until you actually are standing there with the knife, Inigo Montoya style. There's a lot of that. But anyways, you as the writer do need to know what the character's wants are and what the character's needs are. So then we get to Act 2. So Act 2 is essentially every single chapter is moving forward your main plot line in some way, shape, or form. But every chapter is also moving along another plot. It could be that it's milieu plus intrigue, or milieu plus character, or milieu plus event. You can have character plus event or intrigue plus event. That's fine, but the milieu still has to be there. Remember, the core plot of this novel is the Revolutionary War with vampires. If we suddenly have a interlude on the moon, that is not going to work, however cool it is.
We need to bring the space vamps in at some point. Can't save all of that for the sequel.
Don't spoil it, Chris.
Gotta foreshadow.
A foreshadowing is fine, but we can't have the spaceship land yet. So, in this 50K plot map, you have basically 3 opportunities to forward each plot. You might find that one of them requires less or one of them requires more. I often do. But this is at least a start of what you're looking at. Also, the advantage of having 3 of each is that it becomes a microcosm. It allows for one of two things. Either a try-fail cycle, which is fail, fail, succeed, or fail, succeed, fail. Basically, people like things not to come easy. And so if you give your characters a chance to fail at multiple things before they succeed, it can be really rewarding to read. The other thing that you can do here is create kind of some mini arcs, with each of these side plots having a beginning, a middle, and an end within Act 2. Act 2 often suffers from being very slow and bogged down. That's where most books gain weight without much value. So having those internal structures kind of the whole story mirrored in and on the small scale give it a little bit of a backbone. I'm not going to go through all of this yet. Because in the end, what's happening here is simply a causal chain of if this, then that's. Things are going to happen, which are going to cause other things to happen, which are going to cause other things to happen. They should touch all of your plot lines. They should make sense in relation to each other. They should probably be chronological, but don't be afraid if they're not. Sometimes some flashbacks are really important, as Chris will tell you, in flashback form. We have a difference of opinion on flashbacks.
Oh, we do? I didn't know that. You don't like to write them. I think that's what you said.
I don't like to write them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you write a flashback for a character who you know is alive, any tension in the flashback just vanishes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's typically, if you're doing something like that, you're either dealing with how they view another character or a relationship or something. The tension is built elsewhere.
Yeah.
Or you can do the whole switcheroo where you're giving a flashback that people don't know is a flashback.
This is true.
Yes.
That is actually quite fun.
Mm-hmm.
I also like dreams that people don't know are dreams. I know I'm in the minority. Most people hate it, but I kind of love it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, during part 2, another very important thing is that the tension is always rising. You can't just have you can have lulls where people take a breath, but if the gang is fighting one soldier in chapter 8, and then by chapter 13 they're fighting a battalion, but then in chapter 15 they're back to fighting 2 soldiers. Unless there is a really compelling reason why 2 soldiers are suddenly much more difficult because they fought a battalion, maybe they're very injured. Maybe a character who would usually kick ass can't even fight 2 lowly human soldiers. Mm-hmm. That is interesting, but the stakes for the characters and for their side plots need to constantly be rising, or it will feel weird and flat.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're not going to fill all of these out. This is where the real fun of plotting comes in, though. What we are going to touch upon is the end of Act 2. Now, the end of Act 2, you can write without knowing what comes before, or you can at least plot out without knowing what comes before, in many respects, at least in the broad strokes, because it's a fairly straightforward beat. This is why we call it a beat sheet. These are beats that you hit to make a story that people recognize as a story, right? We know how to tell stories. Everyone's heard a billion stories. Beat sheet's just a way to...
Alternatively, they beat you up.
Alternatively, they beat you up. Anyways, the end of Act 2 is known as the darkest hour. Mm-hmm. It's the place where all hope goes to die. It's failure. It's also where the character's want is resolved, usually badly. In this case, Leo has to suffer a loss in his community.
Mm-hmm.
It's the natural resolution of his want. He wants to save his community, and all that he's done, all these battles he's won or lost, all these people he's fought, doesn't save some of his community.
Yeah. So here is my thought. So if we want to make this really tragic, because we want to drive home that his need is different than his want. Yes. So he has, by this point, befriended a human foot soldier.
And he's probably befriended or encountered British vampire.
Correct. So he's befriended this guy, and he comes to a point. His community's attacked. Several of them have been wounded. They cannot give each other their own blood in order to heal. Only person on hand is his foot soldier, the new guy that he's befriended. No other human settlement within 5 miles. Army is someplace else. They were just here recuperating from a spy mission, something like that. Friend offers to give him his blood. Elder or whoever is injured that he has some personal connection with, mother, father, grandfather, refuses the blood. Says we have to get away from this cycle of me either having to kill this guy or take liters of his blood, that he's going to be incapacitated. We have to break this cycle. We have to get away from this. Mm-hmm.
Even in death, we can't or our morals count for nothing.
Yes.
I like it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so a whole bunch of people die. It's horrible. Leo is genuinely in tears. He feels like he's failed, and that is the most important thing about the Darkest Hour, is whatever the character's greatest fear is, whether it be failure or loss, that needs to come out strong. Kick the reader right in the gut with it. And usually, again, because especially in multi-POV stories, it needs to affect all the characters somehow, but mostly it needs to affect your main plot line. This is now, it feels like even if they win the war, he's lost. Something that cannot be replaced. But because we're so low, now we can start going up. There's no place further down to go. And that's where Act 3 begins. Act 3 begins with a choice. And the choice is, I am all the way down here, and yet I choose to pick myself back up again, or be picked up again by someone else. Sometimes people need an intervention. But essentially, Act 3 begins, and it's a different kind of lock-in. It's the characters and the plot deciding, now we must resolve this. In this case, Leo decides, we're going to win this war, and I'm going to find a way to actually make this possible for us to live here. Wouldn't you agree? That's about where he'd have to be. And it's probably a moment where the gang decides to start working together, even though they're at odds with each other. Because something about this darkest night unites them. So, 3 protagonists unite to end the war and bring sustainable.
We have to actually, in the Darkest Night, you can do a dual Darkest Night with the guy in the British. That there is someone that he was very close to that had moved over here, and that he has spearheaded the attack. And now that person is dead, that he sees that there has to be some sort of compromise, that his absolute methods aren't going to work anymore.
And I think especially the British guy thinks that he's doing this for the good of the vampires in the New World, but this is stopped being for their good. Now they're just being slaughtered too, along with the humans. This is now an existential crisis. He realizes that his side isn't the good guys.
Are we the baddies?
Yes. So the human is just sitting there okay, I've accepted that there are vampires, and their darkest night is more about being willing to sacrifice themselves to save someone other. And their darkest night might be if they wanted to survive the war, in essence, that is the resolution of their want. They choose that there are more important things. And it really kind of starts opening it up to the character's need, which is to find a reason to fight the war, right? That isn't just survival. All right. And this is where the story becomes really easy to draft, because just like we opened up and introduced each plot element, we're now going to start closing them. And that means we're resolving, essentially. And we're going to do them in the opposite order. It's like HTML code. The most important thing opens first and closes last, and you bracket in as you go. So we started with milieu. That's the last thing we're going to close. But our smallest thing, our least important side plot, is event, which means an event needs to start. The human character needs to take the lead and lead us into an event that is going to be the finale. So I think we need to go do some mayhem at a battle. Sounds great.
Well, the question is, how long has this been going? Because again, this is only a 50,000 word novel. That you have to question how much time is going to have elapsed.
Yes, and this is this is a 50,000 word novel. Obviously, this method does expand. But in this 50,000 word novel, say that the goal of the first novel isn't to win the Revolutionary War. Say it's a part of a trilogy.
Yes.
The goal of the first novel is to form a company.
Okay, so again, back to Valley Forge, crossing the Delaware, Trenton.
Okay.
And that's also uniting humans and vampires into a cohesive front. Unified, not cohesive.
Yeah.
And this can also be, we bring in Washington. Washington finds out that there are vampires, and they don't all want to suck human blood.
Okay, and then we are closing the character. This is, obviously the event and the human are tied together. I think it's that now we really want to have him, and maybe the human character like makes the peace happen between the actual lower level people. Yes, they are united, but they're grouchy at each other. Like they are failing to win this battle because they're still not seeing each other as people. So human character helps individual soldiers realize
there has to be some like
so
critical
different.
Communication that two sides have to attack at the same time.
Yes.
And neither of them wants to cooperate, and human has to be the go-between.
Exactly. Then we are closing up the intrigue. So our vampire from Britain, this needs to be the moment when they do something that absolutely cements them as you're a traitor now.
Yes.
And puts them on the side of the good guys. So British vamp does a betrayal on Britain and joins the United Vamp Human Army. And then it's time for the climax to begin. That means that the battle hits in full, right? This story. And this is where the characters' needs are resolved. So this is, we have a reason to fight together. We have something to fight for. It really doesn't have to be more than that. In this kind of story, it kind of writes itself as part of the battle. I'm willing to die for this because I have, this vision of how things can be. So the battle starts. And now we close the milieu. This could be the battle, the main character almost dies in this battle and maybe is saved by the human.
And we start to find out something with the blood/the magic system, because that's something that we're going to have threads going forward.
Saved by the human and the ex-British vampire. Maybe the ex-British vampire says something that has been a secret over in Britain that you can actually feed off a human without killing them. This is how you do it.
You suck the blood out of their left pinky toe.
Exactly. And then we have the denouement. Denouement is simply the breath after the plot where everyone can just have a moment, or sometimes it's the epilogue, the setup to the next book. And I think in this case, it should be the setup to the next book. We should zoom out from the main characters, go somewhere else to maybe the British side or somewhere up above and give a teaser for what comes next. So this is a hook to the next book. Or break of tension. Now you'll notice a floating chapter of doom down here. This is a 50,000 word book. It's pretty tight plot-wise, so I always include a floating chapter in my 50,000 word goal because I know somewhere I'll need an extra chapter.
You know what I thought that was when I saw this? I thought that was your hook. Because the floating chapter of doom, oh crap, we're going to have to deal with this next.
That's fair. That's super fair. All right. And then you have a book, essentially. You still have to fill in the middle. And the middle is important. I don't want to minimize this. But once you have a beginning and once you have an end, going back and fixing the middle should only shed light on the beginning and the end. It's absolutely doable. You just go through it one at a time. You play around with a few different orders. Don't feel the need to go through in perfect order every single time. You can mix it up. You can have 2 back-to-back character chapters or whatever you want. Sometimes trying to force yourself into a regular rotation can be really hard and damaging to the plot you're actually trying to tell. The most important thing, though, is that you maintain a causal chain throughout the entire novel. Basically, from the inciting incident, the only way things could play out, minus some, character choosing different things, but with the characters making the choices that they do, the only way this could play out is the way it's written.
Mm-hmm.
The moment something happens by happenstance or coincidence, you break your causal chain. You just want to avoid doing that. And that's how you fill out a beat sheet for NaNoWriMo, at least this beat sheet, the one I keep throwing at people.
Now, is it a blunt object or a piercing object?
Blunt.
Okay, so it's going to hit, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to penetrate. There's no pointy end.
Yes. For a question from the audience, are the 3 pro tags for 18 the 2 vampires and the human? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This is a 3 protagonist book in a 4 mice element, so where they end up on the chain is going to vary. But yes, in this particular example, it would be all 3 of them. Generally, if you're writing your climax, the wants of all of the characters need to be in tatters, and the needs of all the characters need to be met or not met deliberately by the climax. They can't just have each of them has a tiny little mini climax. It all has to come together to feel really satisfying. That doesn't mean that the characters have to physically be in the same space, but what is happening to one needs to affect what is happening to the other, even if they're across the world from each other.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you've liked this explanation, please subscribe, do all those fun things. If you have a very different way of plotting, I'd love to hear about it. Again, in the comments. YouTube loves that interaction, so go for it, friends. And please do feel free to use this beat sheet as a resource. It's always going to be up in Google Drive. You can make yourself a copy, play around with it, change the layout, change the colors, mess with it as much as you want. I do have both a 50K storyline and a 20K short story map in the sheet. The 20K one is divided into 5 acts, and I find it's just an easier pace for shorter work, for novelettes and things like that. But the 3-act structure will work for pretty much any length. You can expand or contract it ad infinitum. All right. Well, thank you all so very, very much for watching. Thank you, Chris, for joining me and for prompting this wonderful revolutionary vampire war.
Just another thing that we need to write.
Of course. It's on our list behind the 10,000 other projects.
That we'll never get to.
That we'll never get to. So thank you very much for joining us. Why don't you tell some people what you have going? Because you just have something new that just came out.
Oh, this is actually something we both worked on. So I'm Christopher Russell. Like Allegra, I primarily write epic/high fantasy. If you know of me, you probably know of me for the Divinity's Twilight series, the first book of which is Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. So always have a copy with that in my hand. But we actually have a sort of collab project, actually 2 of them. So one is about to come out in November, and that's something we co-wrote. This is something that I wrote, and then Allegra did the cover for. This is a short novella. Takes place on another world within my Constella combined universe. It's called Gravitas. And it is the story of a very depraved character, a ruthless problem solver called Lord Fixer Scraw. And the College of Auguries comes up with this prophecy that the nation is going to be destroyed in 30 days. And so the leaders come to Fixer Scraw and say, you can have as much money as you want, as many resources, as much manpower, just fix the problem, save us. And the tagline for the story is, sometimes the cure is worse. I said to be careful not to let the ends justify the means.
And it is creepy and amazing. The
Yes.
magic system is phenomenal, and you should absolutely get it. It is free up on Amazon, unless you want a fancy physical copy, and then you have to pay a couple dollars.
Yep,
But
and again, covered by Allegra, did incredible binding, wrap all around. Even the teaser looks great with the crown on the back. It really has the Victorian / steampunk mid 19th century vibe that we were going for this.
clearly, we need to expand that into the Revolutionary War with vampires.
Yes.
All right, folks. Well, that is all for today. Thank you very much to my audience and to my patrons for helping me make these things possible. If you are brand new to the channel and haven't heard us before, check out my other videos and come join us in our Discord. We have a lot of fun. We do a lot of writing and shenanigans, mostly. Lots of cute pet pictures. Come for the pet pictures. Stay for the writing.
And dragons.
Right. And dragons. Of course, always dragons. All right, folks. Till next time.